Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another online causal inference seminar. Today, we have the pleasure of welcoming Julie Josse from the pre-medical INRIA INSERM team and the University of Montpellier to talk about causal alternatives to meta-analysis. Discussing today will be Larry Hahn from Northeastern. We look forward to these talks. And there are people in the Q&A to help answer your questions. I see Ahmed, Clement, and Remy, and Razieh will handle, I guess, the Q&A. So I'll switch over to her.
Thanks, Emma. So as before, we ask the participants to submit their questions in the Q&A as soon as you have them. And as Emma said, we have Clement, Remy, and Ahmed to deal with the questions. And if there are any remaining questions, Julie will have natural pauses to take any questions. So without further ado, I'll pass it to Julie to start.
Okay, so I will share my screen. Up. I do like full screen. Okay, can you see it well?
Yeah.
Okay, so first I would like to thank the organizer for the invitation. So I'm very glad to be back for this seminar series. So as you mentioned, today I will speak about causal alternative to meta-analysis. And this is a joint work with my collaborator Aurélien Bellet and Erwan Skornet, and also Clément, Ahmed, and Remy, who are online to answer the questions. So to assess the causal effect of a treatment on an outcome, like randomized controlled trials are really the gold standard, because basically you just flip a coin to allocate the treatment, and so consequently the distribution of the patient characteristics of the treated and the control group is the same, and so you know that what you see is the effect of your treatment and not the effect of other factors. But despite these advantages, randomized controlled trials are known to have many limitations. So they are expensive. Sometimes it takes a lot of time to set up a trial and you just don't have the time, like during COVID. And in addition, you have strict like inclusion and exclusion criteria, which will result in very limited sample size. So for instance, in a recent survey in surgery, the median sample size for trials was 144 patients. So it really prevents you from doing any personalization of treatment and also from using any AI algorithm. And in addition, in trials, you have also key segment of your population that are excluded, like pregnant women, people with comorbidities, and so on. And so consequently, you may fear that the conclusions drawn from a trials are very different and cannot be generalized to a population that may beneficiate from the treatment. So to tackle some of these limitations, and in particular the limited statistical power, like regulatory agencies often rely on meta-analysis for decision on drug approval. So meta-analysis consists in aggregating the different results of the different trials. So basically, you will have a bit more data because you have more trials. And it really stands at the top of what is called the pyramid of evidence-based medicine. But still, meta-analysis face quite significant challenges. It's not necessarily easy to take into account the heterogeneity across the different studies. And in addition, it will be the focus of the talk today, meta-analysis suffer from a lack of causal interpretation. So in particular, it's really not clear what is the target population on which you will compute and estimate your treatment effect. And as soon as we enter like a causal world, it's not necessarily easy also to aggregate the different causal measures. And finally, due to data silos and regulations, it's also very difficult to share individual level data and to do meta-analysis on individual patient data, and you need to resort to aggregated data. So today I will discuss 3 alternatives to meta-analysis, and they will have in common that we will consider a clear target population on which we will estimate our treatment effect. So we will first study like meta-analysis using aggregated data. So it's a kind of natural output of meta-analysis with a contingency table with treatment and outcome. Then we will use individual data, but the data will be decentralized, and so we will leverage federated causal inference. And finally, we will consider another external populations, and so we will touch upon the topic of generalization and transportability. And so this talk is based on the following works that you can retrieve also on our webpage. And before digging into causal meta-analysis, I will first discuss the causal measures that we will consider and their statistical properties. So often when we estimate treatment effects, so in many papers, in fact, we are used to use absolute measures like the risk difference. So the expectation of your potential outcome when treated minus the expectation of your potential outcome where control. So the mean of your outcome when everybody is treated minus the mean of the outcome when everybody is controlled. But it turns out that there exist other absolute measures, but there are also other relative measures. So for instance, the risk ratio, so the expectation of the potential outcome when everybody is treated divided by the expectation of the potential outcome when controlled. And there are other relative measures like the odds ratio, which is very popular in biostatistics. And it turned out that different treatment measures give you really different impressions on the effect of the treatment. So I like this example to illustrate this point. So this is a randomized controlled trial where I have a binary outcome, y equal 1, I have a stroke, y equal 0, no stroke. I have a binary treatment, and I have also a feature x. So my patients are clustered in two categories, whether x equal 1 or x equal 0. And basically, x equal 1 correspond to a low baseline risk. So it means that the probability to have a stroke when you are not treated, given the fact that you are in this strata x equal 1, is low. So when we look at the results, for instance, for the risk difference, we can see on my population that the treatment reduced by 0.045 the probability to suffer from a stroke. If I look at the risk ratio, I can see that the risk ratio is treated at 0.6 times the risk of having a stroke compared to the control. So I'm not sure it's so helpful to kind of have a feeling of the effect of the treatment, but maybe what can be a bit more puzzling at the beginning is that the risk difference is heterogeneous with respect to the feature x, whereas the risk ratio is homogeneous with respect to this feature x. And so, of course, at first it's a bit like puzzling because it boils down to saying like, okay, the effect of my treatment, for instance, depends on sex or on age, but it depends on age only if I look at risk difference, but not if I look at the risk ratio. So it's a bit puzzling at first. Then we can also see that there is an impact of the baseline risk. So to see this, we can take another example. So for instance, if I say that I have a 3% baseline mortality, which is reduced to 1% by treatment, risk difference will show a 0.02 drop, while risk ratio will show that control have 3 times the risk. So it means that risk difference suggests in a way a small effect, while risk ratio highlights a larger one. And so depending on who you are and what your interest, you may decide to present either the risk difference or the risk ratio. So fortunately, like the authorities recommend, in fact, there are guidelines in clinical trials, and they recommend, it's even mandatory, to report both absolute and relative measures, to have a kind of comprehensive views of your treatment effect. But still, there are a lot of debates on the choice of causal measures. So we can look a bit at more the statistical properties of these causal measures, and these properties can also be useful when you think about aggregating different causal measures for meta-analysis. So a property that can be interesting is collapsibility. So collapsibility means that your population effects is equal to a weighted sum of local effects. So the risk difference is directly collapsible. So it means that the weights are equal to the population proportions. So to retrieve here my population risk difference on my trial, my 0.045, I can simply compute like the proportion of people in the strata x equal 1 times the risk difference in this strata plus the proportion of people with x equal 0 times the risk difference in this cluster x equals 0, and I will retrieve my effect on my population. So this is directly collapsible. Then the risk ratio, for instance, is not directly collapsible, but it is only collapsible. So it means that the weight depends on the distribution of your potential outcome when controlled. And so more precisely, if I look at the formulae, if I want to retrieve my risk ratio for my population, I can compute the risk ratio on each strata. And then I will aggregate this using the collapsibility weight. And you see that the collapsibility weight depends on your baseline risk, expectation of y0 given x, and expectation of y0. And just as a remark, even though it's recommended to display both relative and absolute measures, it turns out that there are very few estimation strategies for the relative measures like the risk ratio. Okay, so on this slide, we have kind of summarized like the different properties for this measure, risk difference, risk ratio, odds ratio, and so on. And so we have added another one. So we have directly collapsible, collapsible. We have also logic respecting. So logic respecting means that your marginal effect is comprised in between the mean and the max of the conditional effect. And for instance, the odds ratio is not logic respecting. So you can have a logic ratio in your population of 0.26, where an odds ratio for men of, for instance, 0.16 and for women of 0.16. So when we look at this table, it seems that the odds ratio, even though it's quite popular, do not seem to enjoy a lot of nice properties. Okay, and all the measures that we will consider here in this talk, in fact, are called first moment population causal measures. So first moment population causal measures, it means that they depend only on the marginal distribution of your potential outcome y1 and y0, and more precisely, that depends only on the expectation of y1 and the expectation of y0. So with this phi notation, I can kind of retrieve all my causal measure. So phi is equal to x minus y for the risk difference, x over y for the risk ratio, and so on. And so I define a population level measures in opposition to what is called the individual measures, which the individual measures will depend on the joint distributions of your potential outcome, so not necessarily identifiable. So for instance, for the risk ratio, the individual measures will be the expectation of the individual ratios, and the population measures will be the ratio of the expectation. And these two quantities are not equal. And when you start thinking about it, you start also thinking about, okay, what is a good causal measures for this kind of non-linear measures. Okay, so now let's start with meta-analysis. So I will consider that I will have the outputs of k randomized controlled trials that study the same treatment A binary and the same outcome Y binary as well. And so the results are available in the form of the contingency table. So it's a classical output for randomized controlled trials. And so we will denote N A Y, so the number of observations with treatment A and with treatment small y. And then in meta-analysis, based on this table, you will compute your causal contrast, risk difference, risk ratio, odds ratio, and so on, an estimation of its variance, and you will aggregate all these estimations. And classical meta-analysis methods, so aggregate the results of all the different studies by assuming a Gaussian model. So fixed effect meta-analysis, so assume that you have your theta k that follows a Gaussian distribution centered around your true parameters theta stars, and you have some variability around this true. So it means that the heterogeneity between the studies just come from this variability around this theta star. Then, if you suspect more heterogeneity, you will turn on to random effect models. So random effect models are really hierarchical Gaussian models. So I will have my theta at k that follow a Gaussian distribution centered around theta k, and then this theta k follow a Gaussian distribution centered around these theta stars. And both fixed and random effects meta-analysis will aggregate these theta k's using a weighted sum of these theta k's with weights which are proportional to the inverse of the estimated variance. So this is really classical meta-analysis. Now, if I want to introduce more a kind of a causal view or causal lens for meta-analysis, I will first, this will be very useful, in fact, to kind of model the heterogeneity, as I mentioned at the beginning, between the studies. So I will denote that H, the study membership, and I have my covariates X, and these covariates are not necessarily, are not observed here because I only have aggregated data. But still, I can have heterogeneity in the sense that I can have different distributions in the patient's characteristics in the different trials. So that's why I have an arrow from H to X. So I can have shift between covariate distributions, but here I will assume that I will not have shift in conditional expectation of potential outcome given X. And so this assumption is an assumption of transportability of the conditional expectation that you will retrieve a lot in the generalization transportability literature. So in a way, it means that I do not assume that I have an arrow from H to Y. I do not have here a trial effect. So under these assumptions, I can write my the effect of my treatment, so expectation of K of my potential outcome YA. So PK is the covariate distribution of study K, and expectation with the index K is the expectation in this study K. So I can write this quantity. So this quantity is related to the effect of my treatment, to my causal effect, because remember, I focus only on first moment population causal measure, so that depends only on expectation of potential outcome. So I can rewrite these quantities as follow. So it means that my theta k can be written as a form of theta, my causal effect on my population pk. And so I will say that theta star is causally interpretable if it can be written as theta of p star for some distribution p star. So it means that it exists a population p star for which theta star is the associated population level measure. So here theta k is my population measure for my population pk. Okay. So with this framework in mind, I can now look at the random effect classical meta-analysis. So in this setting, we suppose that we have a random distribution for the covariates, like pk. Consequently, my theta k will be random, and so the random effect model will fit within this framework. And so with these lights, in fact, your parameter of interest, theta meta, can be seen as the mean of the theta k's with respect to this randomness. So theta meta is really the expectation of your theta k or the expectation of theta of pk. Okay? And now, if we consider that theta is a linear contrast, because theta and the expectation commute, you can write theta meta as the expectation of your theta k, so the different estimates of your causal effects in each study, as theta of expectation of pk. So it really means that the average, the mean of your different ITs on each trial populations is equal to your treatment effect on the average population, expectation of pk. Okay? But then if theta is not linear, as it is the case for the risk ratio, the odds ratio, it's not possible to express theta meta in the form of theta of a distribution like p star for a univocally defined target population p star. So it means that you do not have a kind of a clear target population, and so you don't know exactly what do you estimate as a causal effect on some population. So this kind of first takeaway is that if you look at random effect meta-analysis models through a causal lens, in fact, you can interpret it as a kind of in a causal way as soon as you look at linear contrast, but it's not easy to interpret it causally if you look at nonlinear contrast. So how can we do if I want to do a real causal meta-analysis? The first things to do will be to clearly define your target population. And maybe the target population, if you have all your different trials, can be the one of all studies together, or the kind of mean of all the studies. So we will define P star as a convex combination of all the distributions of the PKs in each trial. And once you have clearly defined your target population, which is this one that could make sense, so this we can discuss, then you will use your aggregated data, your contingency table, to estimate your causal effect, theta, on this P star, on this population that you have defined. And this can be done quite easily, especially if we remember like the collapsibility formulae that I have presented for the risk difference and the risk ratio. So when I look at this collapsibility formulae, in fact, if I kind of stratify on the different trials on H, easily I can see that, okay, to compute my population effect with the effect from each trials for the risk difference. So I will compute the risk difference on each trials, and then I will aggregate here with the proportion of observation in each trial. Then for the risk ratio, I will compute the risk ratio in each trials, and I will aggregate with the collapsibility weights. But it turns out that in fact you can also do it when you have causal measures that are not collapsible. So how does it work? So I will just kind of explicit how the formulae for the risk difference, risk ratio, and odds ratio with this kind of causal view. So we will denote psi hat of A like a natural estimator for the expectation of your potential outcome. So it's the proportion of observations with outcome 1 for treatment A. And so for the risk difference, basically, we will have a weighted average of the risk difference in each trials. And here the weights are different than classical meta-analysis because I do not have inverse of variance. I have the proportion of observations. For the risk ratio, as I mentioned, it will be a weighted average of each risk ratio, but with collapsibility weights. But it turns out that we can also see it differently as averaging both outcomes separately. So basically here, I just average expectation of Y1 in each trial with these weights, and I do expectation of Y0 in each trials with these weights as well. And so consequently, for the odds ratio, it's not collapsible, so it will not be a weighted average of separate odds ratio, but here again, I will aggregate separately the outcomes. So now if we compare classical meta-analysis with this causal meta-analysis on simulated data, we can do this, for instance, for a balanced study. So here I only have 2 trials. And so if I look at my risk ratio causal, I see, as I mentioned, like the expectation of Y1 in the first trial plus the expectation of Y1 in the second trial, divided by the same thing for Y0. And when you look at the classical meta-analysis, because meta-analysis for risk ratio is often done on the log scale, you will take exponential to retrieve your risk ratio. And so consequently, the classical one corresponds to a geometric mean of your risk ratio. And so when we compare both, we can see that this one, the classical one, will be a bit more sensitive to like small values for the expectation of Y0. And on this plot, if I look at random effect classical meta-analysis and causal meta-analysis, I can see like strong discrepancies. Like my causal one gives a risk ratio which is below 1, and the random effect gives a risk ratio which is above 1. So it really means that you can say, okay, with the classical method, my treatment is beneficial, and with the causal view, I will say, okay, my treatment is deleterious. And so, or the other way around. So in a way, it could be a bit dramatic, let's say. So this was a simulation, but we have done this also with real meta-analysis. So this is one where the random effect classical one gives you a significant effect, and where our causal meta-analysis gives us a non-significant effect. So we can do this. This was one meta-analysis, and we have done this across like 600 real-world meta-analysis from the Cochrane library. And so on this plot, I have represented like the causal meta-analysis one and the random effect ones. So basically, when we look at these plots, you can see that it's quite a line. So in a way, maybe it's a bit reassuring also because there are a lot of kind of drug approvals that are based on meta-analysis, but still there are some discrepancies and you see sometimes some outliers. So it means that in some cases, it can give really different conclusions. Okay, I can just pause to see if there are some questions.
There was a
Otherwise,
question that was taken care of. Please go ahead. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, perfect. So now that we have seen like meta-analysis on aggregated data, we can turn to meta-analysis with individual data. So it means that I will consider that I have the trials with the patient characteristics. So I will have the X, but still I do not have all the data aggregated together. I have decentralized data. And consequently, to be able to estimate my treatment effect from decentralized data, we will leverage like federated learning. So we will do like a federated causal inference to bridge the two, to be able to learn our treatment effect from this decentralized data, but still outputting the results as if the data would have been centralized. So federated causal inference can really be seen as a kind of alternative, compelling alternative to meta-analysis from individual data. So federated learning, it's in its simplest form. It works with an architecture with a server and clients. And the server and the clients, which will be the trials, the hospitals, communicate iteratively. So in its simplest form, like the server starts by initializing the parameter of the model, send the parameters to each client. The clients will use their own data to update the value of the parameters, send it back to the servers for aggregation, and this process will be iterated. Okay, so just to be more concrete, I will show how to do federated learning for linear regression. So if you want to do like federated learning with linear regression, I will consider like a simple linear regression model, y equal x beta plus epsilon, and federated learning is easily implementable as soon as you kind of estimate your parameters using gradient descent. So gradient descent for linear regression just works as follows. So you initialize the value of your parameters, then you do a gradient step. So you update the value of the parameter with the former value of your parameter, your learning rate, and the gradient. And so here your loss is simply the mean square error loss, okay? And so you repeat these steps until convergence. And basically, as soon as you do a lot of steps, then you will end up with a solution which will be your ordinary least square solutions. Okay, and you have solutions to set up the tuning parameter. So now if you are in a decentralized framework, so federated learning works well as soon as it's easy to split your loss into k parts. And this is the case for your mean square error loss, because you can rewrite your mean square error loss with the loss on each side, that I will denote LK. So then how it works? So still your server has the initial value for the parameter, beta zeros. And then for each communication round, each site is going to do only one gradient step. So it means that it updates the value of the parameter using its own data. Because here in my loss, I really have xk, so it's really the data for the site k. And then the parameters are sent to the server for aggregation. So this is the important point in federated learning. You just share parameters, you do not send data. And this steps is repeated. So here what we can note is that here I have done only one gradient step. If you do like a full gradient, basically it is called one-shot federated learning, but it can also be seen as kind of meta-analysis on the beta coefficients, because it means that each site basically is going to compute its OLS coefficients if you do full gradient. And so then you just aggregate the OLS coefficients from each site. So it's really a meta-analysis on the regression coefficient. Okay, so this is like a federated learning for linear regressions. So now if I go back to my setting, so I am in the setting where I have my k different trials. Now I have access to individual data, so I have the covariates, but they are decentralized. And my aim is really to estimate my treatment effect on my population, which is defined as all the trials together. So it's really my p-star from before. So it's really my convex combinations of all my trials populations. And so we will consider also different settings from heterogeneity. So same as before, heterogeneity in treatment allocation. You can have different probability to be treated in each trial. Heterogeneity in covariate distributions. And here I will add heterogeneity in terms of center effects. So it means that due to different practices or different organizational context, I can have an effect of the trial on the outcome. Okay. And so we will compare like 3 different kind of federated estimators. So the baseline, the GRAL, is the estimator that you would compute if you have all the data aggregated. So this is what I call the pool. Here I am in a trial, but I am not going to use difference in means. I am going to use difference in conditional means to be able to improve on the variance because I have access to the covariates. So that's why I do a regression for the treated and a regression for the control. And in this setting, I just focus on risk difference to start. So we will compare meta-analysis, so classical meta-analysis and causal meta-analysis, but it works in the same way. So each site computes its regression coefficient. Then each site computes its average treatment effect to at 1 to at k. And then it just aggregated to have your finite results, aggregation with sample size weights, so the causal one, or aggregation with inverse variance, so the classical one. Then we consider also this one-shot federated learning. So one-shot federated learning means that each site computes its regression coefficient. Then the regression coefficients are sent to the server for aggregation. So basically it means that I will have one global regression coefficient at the server. The server sends back these global regression parameters to each site. And using these global regression parameters and their own data, they compute their average treatment effect. And then it's again aggregated by the server to have your final estimate. And the last one will be the full gradient descent-based federated learning. So it means that your regression coefficients are learned using this Fed average algorithm that I have presented. So using all this data decentralized as if you have all the data. And once you have your global regression coefficient parameter, it's exactly as the one-shot step. It is sent to each site. They compute their own average treatment effect, and then it is aggregated. And so we have compared these different strategies in terms of statistical performances and communication cost. So here I will just consider the case where I have heterogeneity in treatment allocation. So I have different probability to be treated in each trial. So what we can see that we have, so the baseline is a pool. So the gradient descent will give you the same. So first, all the estimators are unbiased here, but they will differ in terms of variance. So the gradient descent will give you the same as the pool. But then if we look at the meta-analysis and even or causal meta-analysis, we will have differences. So it's a bit difficult to sparse the differences with this expression, but basically, as soon as the probability to be treated in each trial are different, then you will have differences and the variance of the meta-analysis will be larger in comparison to the variance of the federated one. So we can see this in these simulations. So here I have 5 studies, 10 features, 50 observations per studies, and I have really large differences in the treatment allocation probabilities. And we can see as the formula that the variance of the meta-analysis in yellow are a bit larger in comparison to the pool one, which correspond to your gradient one, which is the gradient descent in pink. Okay, then we can look at other schemes of heterogeneity. So here, for instance, heterogeneity with respect to the center effects. So in these settings, here we have just represented like the center, the trial, the trial effects, very in a simple way, because we simply add a different constant for each trial in the regression model. Okay, so it's a kind of a first step to model this heterogeneity. And under these assumptions, so we do not have anymore like equality in conditional expectation of potential outcome given the covariates. We do not have anymore like the transportability of conditional expectations, but still we have transportability of the conditional average treatment effects, which are the same in all the trials. Okay. Here we can note just by looking at the graph that H is now a confounder, so you need to take it into account, so even in your kind of trial settings. And in a way, your meta-analysis will take it into account very naturally because you stratify on H. Okay? But then if you look at the other estimators, if you do not do anything, of course, there will be bias. And so you need to adjust. So basically, you just need to add H as an additional covariate in these things. So it's a bit obvious, but here it was the simulations where we have just like performed the kind of federated gradient descent estimator without doing nothing. So they are biased, and the meta-analysis is not biased naturally because of this stratification. And so if we now add like H as a covariate, we will retrieve like no bias also for all the other methods, so which makes sense. But the point here is in a way to say that for the other method, you need to add this additional information, this kind of prior knowledge on the model. So what we have done is that we have tried to do a kind of decision diagram for practitioners, because basically you have different solutions. Okay, I can use all the data and do my federated learning causal inference, or I can do meta-analysis. And maybe there are some cases, so it was a point of this work, where it's not like necessary to use like a complex architecture. You need to have an infrastructure to do your federated learning. So if meta-analysis do the job, it's way easier. So that's why we have tried to do this diagram just to kind of help the user to say, okay, you can, depending on your data and your problems, then you can go either for meta-analysis or federated learning. So basically, the takeaway is that, of course, they have different regime of predilections. And when you have like small sample size in the trials, of course, like using like the federated learning approach makes more sense because you are going to estimate way better your regression coefficients because you have all the data. So it will be better than estimating regression coefficients on very small data set. So small sample size, I will go towards federated learning. Then when it comes to heterogeneity, the picture is a bit less clear in a way. So as we have seen, like meta-analysis naturally handles the center effect in the way we have modeled it, whereas for the other, you need this knowledge. Like you need to know that you have this kind of heterogeneity to kind of put the good models. So all this works here was presented only for the risk difference, but everything really stays the same for my risk ratio, for my odds ratio. The only difference is that I will have to replace aggregation of causal effects by aggregation of expectation of Y1 and expectation of Y0. So for my risk ratio and my odds ratio. And so I will finish by just speaking about using external data. So briefly, I'm just checking the time. Because I will start by just quoting a quote from Issa Dabré and co-author. So basically, they say that, okay, policymakers who use evidence synthesis to inform their decisions are not interested in the population represented by the completed trials, and they always have a different target population in mind. So basically, with this sentence, they kind of completely like recast meta-analysis within a generalization framework. So it means that the aim of this generalization method is really to predict the treatment effect from an RCT to another populations. And for them, it's really like the future of meta-analysis. And what I have presented before was to say, okay, I stay within the kind of classical framework of meta-analysis, but I introduce a causal framework to be able to explicitly define a causal effect on a specific clear target population. And for them, the target population is an external population. And this makes sense also because of the lack of external validity of clinical trials, and you often want to generalize to a kind of broader, larger populations. So an extreme example that I like of generalization methods is the example of this drug Ibrance, where it's a drug for breast cancer. Its efficiency have been shown on a trial on women, and still the FDA has green light its usage on men, so a population which has not been scrutinized by RCT. So yes, for them, like causal interpretable meta-analysis is really transporting causal inference from a collection of trials to a target populations. But it fits within like the aim of being able to say something on pregnant women, on people with comorbidities, and so on. So we have also worked on generalization methods for other causal measures and the risk difference for risk ratio and odds ratio and so on. So just to be more formal, when you have a generalization task, you have your trial. So we will start with one. It's the same thing if you have many trials. And I will assume that I have an observation of n observation from my trials. In my trials, I have individual data with covariates X, my treatment W, and my outcome Y, and I will denote PR of X, the probability of observing individual with characteristics X equal X. And I also have access to a sample of the target population with M observation, and to start in my target population, I only have covariates, I only have X. And all this generalization method really exploits the heterogeneity of the treatment. So basically, if you assume that the distribution of the features is different in the trial and in the target population, then your effect of your treatment in your trial will be different than the effect of your treatment in the target population. So here I still have these phi measures because I still consider like risk ratio, risk difference, and odds ratio, where phi is x minus 1, x divided by y, and so on. And so this scheme illustrates a bit this problem. Like, so I have a probability of death, age. I have a curve for the treated, a curve for the control. And so if it turns out that in my trial I have sampled more people with medium age, I will see a positive effect of my treatment. And if in my target population I have sampled more people with a kind of a low or a high age, then I will see null or non-significant effect. So as soon as the effect of your treatment depends on the characteristic of the patients, and these characteristics are different in the trial and in the target populations, then it makes sense that you have different values. So to be able to generalize, you need some identifiability assumptions. So the first one is the overlap. So this one is super strong in a way because you assume that the support of the covariate distributions in the target population is included in the source. So this one is very strong because in a way it completely prevents from doing extrapolation, which is something that you would like. And then to be able to generalize, you will retrieve the same assumptions than before, like here, transportability of the conditional expectation of your potential outcome given covariates in the trial and in the target population. And under these two identifiability assumptions, so you can identify and then estimate your treatment effect in your target population. And a very simple estimator is simply a reweighted Horvitz-Thompson estimator. So basically, you are going to reweight your trials so that it looks like your observational data, and you are going to reweight it using the ratio of density, so PT divided by PR of X, that I will denote R of X. And so, like for this reweighted Horvitz-Thompson estimator, you can show that you have asymptotic normality for all my causal measures, my first moment causal measures, so risk difference, risk ratio, odds ratio, and you can compute the variance. So this is a classical like weighting estimators. So still in this setting, I have not, like it's an oracle one because I assume that the ratio of densities is known, but you can estimate this ratio of densities. To do so, there are different strategies. Either you can assume like parametric models for the numerators and the denominators, like Gaussian distributions. You can assume a parametric model for the ratio, or you can use a trick using the Bayes formulae. And at the end of the day, you just do a logistic regression to be able to estimate your ratio. So your logistic regression will be a logistic regression where here I have denote S equal 1 where I am in the trial, S equals 0 when I am in the target population, and I just do a logistic model for the probability to be in the trial given the covariates. And all this quantity can be identifiable and estimated, and so you can estimate your ratio of densities using this logistic regression. And here again, for this weighted Hurwitz-Thompson estimator, you can have asymptotic normalities and derive the variance. So I have just presented like weighting strategies to estimate the effect of your treatment in your target population under these assumptions of equality of conditional expectation of potential outcome given the covariates in the trial and in the target population. It's weighting, but you can also derive regression formulae. You can also derive estimators based on efficient influence function. And you can also have estimate your treatment effect using an identifiability assumptions, which is weaker and which is the equality in conditional average treatment effect. So because I think I am just short on time and I should conclude, I think, I will just like mention that there is a small, so basically we are able just to generalize in the target populations or all causal measures. There is something a bit different when you look at nonlinear contrast, is that the efficient influence based estimators will differ. So you will have differences between your one step and your estimating equation estimators. So I will just keep like the simulations to show that we can generalize and also to show these differences between this estimating and one-step estimators. So to conclude, so I have discussed the case of multiple trials and one trials and one observational data. And of course, there are a lot of works to try to kind of summarize the information when you have many trials and when you have many observational data. And there are a bit some subtleties to take into account when you do this, especially when you look at other causal measures. And in the team, we are also working at other causal measures for more complex outcomes, like multivariate outcomes, distributions, and so on. And so I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Julie, for the nice and clear talk. There were a couple of questions, and there's an active question that is being currently taken care of. So maybe we can move on to hearing Larry's discussion.
Okay, are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, all right. So thank you for the opportunity, Julie. That was a really great talk, and I'm happy to discuss causal alternatives to meta-analysis by Julie and colleagues. I'd like to begin by saying that clinicians often ask me the question, what is the difference between meta-analysis and federated causal inference? And before I would say Julie's series of papers here, I would struggle and bumble through giving them an answer like in meta-analysis, maybe they assume homogeneity between the studies and aggregate through some inverse variance weighting. But I think Julie and colleagues have presented wonderfully 4 different settings and associated methods to help us move beyond traditional meta-analytic framework. So for example, she began by explaining through the paper Behrenfeld et al. How to do so using aggregated data. I think this is really, really wonderful and nice to use because we often have just aggregated data through a table 1 or a table 2 in a JAMA New England Journal of Medicine paper, and we try to aggregate those historical trials to come to some conclusions. Then in a set of 2 papers by Khalaf, how to use individualized, decentralized data where you have features, treatment, and outcomes with randomized data and with observational studies. So 2 very nice papers there. And then finally, in the generalizability transportability framework, where you might have a source randomized controlled trial where you do have the full set of data with features, treatment, and outcomes, and then you have a target data set or a target population for which you want to make inference, but you only have features, how to leverage that source information, and what type of exchangeability assumptions you need to make in order to transport or generalize those causal effects. So a really nice set of 4 papers here. I'll begin by just looking at a recent meta-analysis to maybe add a little bit more context and motivation for maybe Julie's work and why it's so important. So there was a New England Journal of Medicine evidence paper on a meta-analysis of glucocorticoids for COVID-19 patients not receiving oxygen. And there was an accompanying editorial on how to combine multiple studies by Ray Wong at Harvard Medical School. And this meta-analysis leveraged the traditional random effects model that Julie detailed. It had 6 studies, and it actually had 5 randomized controlled trials and 1 observational study. The randomized trials were primarily from the recovery COVID-19 trials you may be aware of. And the interesting thing here was that among these 6 studies, 3 of them had no events occur in either the control or treatment group. And when that happens, using standard random effects models, what one can show is that studies with no events in either group, they don't contribute to the estimation of either the between study heterogeneity measure or the overall treatment measure. So essentially, you're throwing away half of your studies. And more generally, with I think someone asked the question, what happens in causally interpretable meta-analysis with rare events? With few studies or with rare events, it is difficult to estimate these metrics. And furthermore, the standard error of an overall treatment effect estimator typically tends to be underestimated. So the confidence intervals tend to undercover. So you're in kind of trouble here with standard methods. And so I think this is really good motivation for Julie's work. And to begin with, using aggregated data, I think Barenfeld et al. Makes the nice point that incorporating causal inference into meta-analysis provides a principled framework for how to address heterogeneity across studies. And they make the point that an estimand is defined to be causally interpretable if it can be written as theta p star for some distribution p star, which defines a target population of interest. And therefore, there's sort of this first important point made in the paper, which is that aggregating risk differences, so this linear contrast, using a random effects model, that would yield a causally interpretable estimand. So you can see that this meta estimand can be written in terms of equality of the expectation of the parameter as well as the parameter of the average population. So in words, the average of the average treatment effects on each of the randomized controlled trial populations would be equivalent to the treatment effect on the overall aggregated or average population. But more generally, for any sort of estimand or contrast theta, if it's not a linear function, then that type of equality does not in general hold. And so Julie gave the example where you might be interested in a risk ratio, and you have a geometric mean with a meta-analytic framework, a traditional one, versus a causally interpretable one. And those two are, there's really no bound that can determine those differences. And the meta-analytic version is much more sensitive to small deviations. And so you can get kind of crazy results where there may be no treatment effect, or there's a very small beneficial treatment effect, or the direction really is undetermined. And so this is can be really troublesome, I think, for practitioners and clinicians. And well, maybe the story isn't so bad. It seems, at least through the this Cochrane database of nearly 600 meta-analyses, we see that using 3 different metrics, the risk difference, the log risk ratio, and the log odds ratio, comparing the causal meta-analytic measure and the random effects model, that for the most part, they stay along this 45-degree line. But there are examples where the deviation is quite dramatic. And in the paper, she goes through one example where the classical random effects meta-analysis misleadingly suggests that treatment increases recovery, and that leads to a recommendation in favor of treatment despite there being an actual harmful effect. And so this is very troubling. Then we move on to federated causal inference using individual data. And the picture I like to have in mind is this following DAG, which in one shot illustrates maybe all possible sources of heterogeneity across sites, although in the paper, we go through sort of case by case these different types of shifts. So in green, we have from the center to the covariates, this type of case mix difference or covariate shift. We also have from the center to the treatment, a propensity score difference or treatment allocation shift in practice. And then from the center to the outcome shift or conditional outcome shift or center effects as they're called. And oftentimes in transportability or generalizability, we make the assumption of exchangeability in mean or exchangeability in effect measure. And so we assume that this arrow does not exist or the absence of such arrows make our lives easier. But if you do have such a DAG with all the arrows present, this is maybe the toughest case. And I think in the discussion questions I want to pose at the end, maybe talk about what to do when you don't want to make structural assumptions that take away certain arrows from such a DAG. Finally, I think very importantly, the question about how to go beyond the average treatment effect via the risk difference. I think we often tend in causal inference to default to this parameter, but Bougdiri and et al. Present a framework for unifying or generalizing a class of first moment population causal effect measures that entails or includes both collapsible and non-collapsible measures under those two exchangeability assumptions. And they go forth with presenting doubly robust estimators. They actually do more than just doubly robust estimators, but in doubly robust estimators, they provide efficient influence functions via both one-step estimators and estimating equation methods. And interestingly, they recommend estimating equation estimators, and they present robustness reasons for doing so, theoretical reasons, as well as nice empirical simulations to support that claim. So if we have time, maybe we can also talk about that in some detail. But just to go to my discussion questions, and let's see how much time we have to go through this. The first one is in the examples Julia presented, the classical random effects, they do often align with the causal approaches on the 45-degree line, but not always. So in general, what guidance might you give practitioners when the methods or the effect measures lead to conflicting conclusions? And from your experience, what most influences those differences for the nonlinear measures? Secondly, you talked a lot about the generalizability task, but you also quoted Issa Dehabre's point about the transportability target population being different or an external population. And so one example of this would be like you have an unbiased estimator that might have high variance. So this could be like a small RCT or a subgroup of interest, and you have like a set of many potentially biased but lower variance estimators. And maybe you're willing to assume identifiability, or you just don't care so much about that, okay? Would you, a question for you, would you combine these estimators for precision gain for that theta 0 hat, which is estimated with low precision, even at the risk of mild bias, potentially like constructing like a super efficient estimator or non-regular estimator? And in general, how do you view this type of bias variance trade-off? And then, okay, we're talking about going beyond just the ATE via risk difference. So let me take it one step further. So in causal survival settings, we often think about maybe combining curves, like treatment-specific, site-specific survival curves, or functionals of them, like the restricted mean survival time, the risk difference or risk ratio. I've tried to work in this space a bit, and have you considered extending methods to survival outcomes under potential distribution shift? And then, okay, I have two more questions. In federated causal inference, we often think, and you've mentioned this beautifully, that there are sort of two aggregation steps. There's the first step of federating, combining, or co-training the nuisance models. And then there's also that second step of learning federated weights to combine the effect measure of interest, like the average treatment effect. And in your experience, which step seems to matter more? And finally, you hinted at this at the very end, and I think you have a very nice work on this already, but how important are, differential privacy guarantees in federated causal inference? It seems to have been more the domain of computer scientists to date, but statisticians seem to be working on this more and more. So, do regulators in the EU and or the US care, and should patients care? Okay, so I should stop there, give you some time. Thanks.
Great. So thank you very much for the nice discussion and the questions. So I will try to answer very quickly to some of them, and you will stop me when you want. So maybe for the first one, so just a slide before on the when we see some differences. So we see large differences, especially when you have heterogeneity. So the more heterogeneity between the trials, the more differences we will see. And also, as I mentioned, when the kind of expectation of Y0 is small in some trials, then we can see some differences. So it still needs to investigations on other meta-analyses, and yes, we still need to investigate, but this is the first hints that we have. Then maybe I will go to the next slide. I will not go into the next slide. So maybe for this federated, like in terms of these two steps. We do not have a clear answer for all the settings. In the RCT settings, I will say that the first step matters more, just because you will estimate in a better way your regression models because you have more data. So in this setting, the first step. Then in observational data, from my point of view, both step matters. So I don't know if one matters more. Maybe for the differential privacy question, I think it's really interesting because it's not because you do decentralized analysis that you have a privacy guarantee. In fact, you need to add something. Differential privacy is a bit the gold standard. As you mentioned, like there are more and more statisticians, also some people who have worked on synthetic data and so on. I think it's useful, but you have this kind of usual trade-off between privacy and utility. And in causal inference, I think we do not need to impose too much privacy because you need to keep utility, and especially when the signal is kind of very low, it's a bit more difficult. So I think there are still a lot of works to do, but it's important to kind of preserve the confidentiality of medical data and not to retrieve individual patient data that you can retrieve easily also with aggregated data. So in some sense, in epidemiology, people have published a lot of aggregated data. It has been the case for many years. It will continue. And so we ask a lot of privacy now. So at the end of the day, it's more like an ethical questions, whether you want something for you or still you want to kind of have information for all your population. So yes, for me, there is also an ethical questions behind. And maybe, so for the two first ones, survival outcome, I agree that it will be nice. We have not considered it. And it will be like the following step to continue on other causal measure like restricted mean survival time. And for the second one, I have not thought about it. It's looks a bit like a PPI, like in the way you have mentioned it. Yes, so this one I don't know, and I guess I have done all quickly. If it's
Thank you, Julie. Yes.
Wonderful. Once again, thank you all, Julie, Larry, Clement, Remy, and Ahmed for the great conversations and your contributions to OCIS. So let me hand it to Emma for the final words.
Thanks, Razi. And thank you, everyone. I think there are still answers being typed in the Q&A, so I don't want to end this before we have finished those. Yeah, but thank you for all the questions and a very nice talk and discussion. Seems like a cool area of research. Wait, what am I doing? Okay, sorry. There we go. As for us, we are now going to be on a summer break. So the seminar series will continue in September, but we won't have weekly seminars through the summer. So I hope you all can have a nice and restful and reinvigorating summer, and we can all return with a lot more new results in September, or at least, feeling up to doing new results. All right, that's it for us. I'd like to thank Julie again, Larry, and also Clement, Ahmed, and Remy for answering questions and the Q&A. Very nice. I'll stop sharing and you can stop recording.